Welcome to the Stay-at-Home Nurse Podcast. I'm your host, Deanna Cooper Gillingham. For over 25 years, I've strived to use my nurse credentials to find work that fit my lifestyle, whether it was raising my 4 children and 3 fur babies, traveling the world, or moving to Mexico and living on the Caribbean Sea. Sometimes I succeeded, and sometimes I failed, but I always learned from the experience. Now, I want to help you by sharing what worked and what didn't work. There are so many opportunities out there for nurses today. The Stay-at-Home Nurse Podcast will inspire and equip you to have a nursing career that is meaningful and supports your lifestyle. Now let's get started. Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of the Stay-at-Home Nurse Podcast. I realized that although I gave you the skinny version of how I went from bedside nurse to living on the beach in Mexico, in the interest of time, I had to leave out a lot of important things. So in this episode, I'm going to cover the 5-year plan that I created to use my nursing credentials to live on the beach in Mexico. So I first got the idea that I needed to do something a little bit different when some friends of mine moved to Europe. They were going to be living abroad as expats, and I thought that was so cool. I wanted to do that. I just didn't know how I would do that as a registered nurse. Then I realized I didn't want to live where it was cold. I wanted to live on the beach somewhere warm. This was about a year or 2 before I actually started making a plan. But at first it was just that seed of, I want to do something different. I need to keep my eyes open of opportunities that are out there. So, important note, you don't have to have it all figured out at the beginning. You can just have a general idea of the direction that you're looking in. And to be honest, I started off by looking internally. I worked for the VA at the time, and so I looked for any opportunity to work abroad. Then in the summer of 2013, I started listening to podcasts. I started hearing about online businesses, entrepreneurship, and not trading hours for dollars. This really intrigued me. Then I heard about someone who made a business helping people to pass a test in architecture. I was really intrigued because this is when I was starting to study for my case management certification. So I started to learn everything that I could about starting an online business and helping people to pass the certification. I thought I would start this off as kind of a side hustle, just something to do on the side. At the time, I was working 2 PRN jobs in addition to my full-time nursing job. So to say I had a lot on my plate was an understatement. And I thought, wow, if I can do some kind of side hustle to get some money in, something outside of nursing, that would be really great. From the time I decided to start a business, I wanted to make sure that any business that I started met some requirements for the lifestyle that I wanted to live, that 5-year plan of where I wanted to be, location independent in 5 years. I made sure that any business that I even thought of was location independent, that I was not trading time for dollars, so that eliminated any type of freelancing, that I could start a business with no employees, and I wanted it to be simple. So I decided to write a book similar to the architecture guy that I was following and what he had written. It sounded easy, but there were a lot of sacrifices. I had to get up at 4:45 a.m. every weekday, and I am not a morning person, okay? I worked night shift most of my career because I am not a morning person at all. But I had to be fresh. I was trying to write after work, and my brain was just so dead at that point. It was really hard for me to get anything out. My son, I had to get him up for school at 6 a.m., and that's when the whole day was just out of control from 6 a.m. until I got him on the bus, and then I was working. So from 4:45 until 6 a.m. was my time to write. But I didn't just have to write. I also had to research. So since I was drained after my day at work, and I really couldn't write, I decided to do my research in the evenings. So once I got the kids fed and homework done, I would sit and do my research so that I could write for the following morning. On Saturday, all day Saturday, I would put in an 8-hour day of just writing. And then most of Sunday, I would spend writing. I gave up a lot. I gave up time with my family. I gave up time with my friends. I had no social life. When my kids went to the movies, they went without me. Luckily, I had some older children who kind of took up the burden with the younger children, and they would entertain them, take them to the movies, take them to the park, take them to games, so I could write. This was not just a sacrifice for me, but it was a sacrifice for my entire family. So I don't want to make it sound like entrepreneurship is something that's easy. You have to really want it. Every day, you have to make the choice to show up for your business. In December of 2013, I started my first website. And at that point, I was starting to get more clarity on what I wanted the end result to be, but I still never dreamed it would be what I have today. So fast forward to April of 2014, I passed the exam I was studying for. This was a huge milestone for me because if I was collecting all this information and doing all this research and writing all this and I didn't pass the exam, I was not going to be able to continue with this project. Now, I have to explain, when I was writing this book, this was a huge, huge hurdle for me. Now that I had all this information and I passed the exam, I was ready to write the book, I realized that I couldn't write. I should have thought of that before. But for 20 years, I had been writing nurses' notes, which are fragmented sentences. And for those of you who never had to write nurses' notes because you're using a computer system or a check-off-the-box type of computer system, we actually were slapped on the hand if we wrote sentences. We were supposed to just write fragmented sentences about what was happening, leaving out all the fancy, frilly stuff. So when it came time for me to actually write, I was having a really hard time. And I also had a problem, even when I was homeschooling my kids, I actually paid other people to teach them English because once they got into having to write things, I was terrible and I couldn't teach them. And so I was actually outsourcing that. So it never occurred to me when I thought, hey, I'll just write a book that I couldn't write. So I had to do something. I was already invested in this. I was already determined I was going to do it. So I took an online writing course. That really helped me, just getting in the routine of writing every day and critiquing it and making it better. It really didn't take any time at all. It was maybe 4 to 6 weeks and I was back up to speed. I was able to write. I was able to write sentences and then paragraphs and then chapters. Another thing that kind of held me accountable was I had committed to writing a chapter in a compilation book. So this was a book that several people were writing together. There was one person who was in charge. We had to pay him money so that he would let us be included in his book. And I didn't really have the money at the time, but I knew I needed to do this because I knew that if I invested this money that I really didn't have into being in this book, first of all, it would make me have to learn how to write. It would make me have to write on a level that was going to be published. I would learn about publishing and editing and all those types of things. But plus, having put that money in, I was going to finish it and I was going to do it. By investing in myself, it really helped me to kind of light a fire under me and didn't let me not do this. That book being published also helped me to get over a fear of publishing, the fear that people would laugh at me and that I couldn't write. And so when I actually published that and nobody laughed, it helped me to take the next step and write and continue to write the book that I would eventually publish and start my business with. So in August of 2014, I finished writing my book. At that point, I had to have it professionally edited, formatted, and a cover made. Again, if you listen to the previous episode, I couldn't go to a traditional publisher because the average time from a book being written until it's published is about 18 months with a traditional publisher. And by that time, my book would be outdated because the testing organization was coming up with a new test. So if I waited 18 months, by the time my book was published, it would be out of date. So I realized that if I published it myself, I could get this done in a matter of a month. It actually took me closer to about 3 months, but that's because I really didn't know the process and I had to learn it along the way. So I had to learn about publishing, I had to learn about self-publishing, and I had to invest more money into editing, formatting, and a cover. I finally was able to self-publish my book in December of 2014. I was really scared. I was way out of my comfort zone, but it was something that I just had to do. My expectations were that I would sell a few copies a month and that I would get back the money that I invested, and that maybe after a while I would only have to work one job and I wouldn't have to do my side jobs. In reality, the book did much better than I expected. I had a lot of positive reviews. People started sharing the information with their friends that were taking the exam. On Amazon, where it was being published, it shot up to one of the most popular books in that category. And the first year, I made $48,915.58. That was in 2015. That was the net income that I got from that book. So I did have business expenses related to that, such as shipping and website. And then I had the initial investment that I had made into editing and formatting and cover design. But then after that, I still made a pretty nice profit for something that I had done previously. So that got me thinking about my goal of living the Caribbean life. So yes, I was watching HGTV and I saw all these people living the island life and the Caribbean life, and I realized that that's what I wanted. I wanted to live on the Caribbean Sea on a beach. Okay, so now how do I get there? So my thought was, if I could live somewhere with a low cost of living and get my expenses down, that I could actually have this Caribbean life. I decided that if I was earning US dollars and living off of pesos, if I paid off all my debt and that I had a little bit of a runway or an emergency fund, some money to fall back on, that I might actually be able to do this. Even if it was for just a short period of time, I would be able to do this. Things happened a little faster than I expected. The exam changed, as I explained in part 1, and I had a decision to make. I could take a leap of faith and go ahead full force with this business, which was not making enough money for me to live off of, and start to think about ways that I could expand the business and help and serve people even more, or I could just give up. Well, I did not give up. I took the leap of faith, and 3 years after I heard that podcast that changed my life, I arrived at my new home in Mexico. Since then, I've continued to grow my business, meeting more needs, filling more holes, and solving more problems. I've invested more in my education to learn about business and entrepreneurship. I prefer the more non-traditional learning, so I've been doing courses and classes and hiring coaches and mentors. So I really haven't gone back to school for an MBA or anything like that. I also prefer just-in-time learning, so I want to learn just what I need to know, just when I need to know it, so that I can implement it. And that's actually what I create for the nurses and case managers who take my courses. I teach them only what they need to know, no filler and no fluff, and I teach it right when they need to learn it. So, takeaways from this episode. I want you to know that you don't have to have it all figured out to start. You just have to have a general idea of the direction that you want to go in and then start moving in that direction. As you move, you'll begin to gain more clarity. Stop and check in with yourself regularly. As things begin to move and more opportunities open up, it's easy to get sidetracked and get away from your initial goal and vision. Every once in a while, just ask yourself, am I still moving in the direction of where I want to be a few years from now? This was a really big dream for me, and your dream has to be big enough to be worth the sacrifice. There's a saying that if you're not willing to sacrifice for your dream will become your sacrifice. So you have to have a dream that's big enough and that you want enough to sacrifice whatever you have to sacrifice to get there. For me, that was sacrificing sleeping in the morning. That was sacrificing time with my family and with my friends. And that was sacrificing money to invest in myself. But in the end, it was so worth it. I now have more time with my family and friends. I now have more money, and I now can sleep in, and I never have to set an alarm. Well, not really never, but most days I don't have to set an alarm. When people meet my partner and I, and they hear our story, they always say, "Wow, you're living the dream." And we always say, "No, we're not living the dream. We are living our dream." You have a dream, and I want you to be able to live your dream. I hope by hearing this gets you one step closer, even if it's just thinking about what is your dream, because honestly, that's the first step. First, you have to know what that dream is, and even if it's just getting you thinking that I need a dream, that's a great step too. Thank you for listening, and I do want to take just a minute to apologize for the background noise that you heard. My boyfriend and I do live on a condo in the beach in Mexico, and right now this is a very popular place for tourists to be So there are some children in the pool, and even though we are on the 4th floor, you can still hear them with the windows closed and the doors closed. So if you heard some kids in the background, those are just some kids that are enjoying the pool here in Mexico. If you like this podcast, please, please, please subscribe so you never miss an episode. Also, I would love it if you would consider leaving a rating and review. And I hope you will join me next week when we will learn how social media impacts your nursing career. Thank you, and I look forward to talking to you again next week.